Let's dive right in. A fresh wave of protests hit Israel as after a stormy session, the Knesset has given its nod to the first of many contested bills that excludes the judiciary from ruling on the reasonableness of the government decisions. The bill was adopted in its first reading by 64 votes to 56. And according to the reports, the morning after Israel's parliament adopted this controversial bill, which essentially limits court powers, the Israelis blocked a highway on the outskirts of Jerusalem. This new decision on the judicial reform bill has sparked massive protests. Since January this year, waves of protests have hit Israel as after coming to power last year, the Netanyahu government has been pushing for judicial reform. The Israelis have left no stone unturned to express their anger and frustration with Netanyahu's plans. This is, of course, a story that we've been tracking closely. The protests ongoing in Israel against this ongoing legislation. As we know, since the Netanyahu government has been in power, they have been pushing for judicial reform, and people on the streets have been voicing their frustration and anger. And to get us up to date with what's happening on the streets, joining us now is our correspondent Jody Cohen. Jody, what's the latest on the protests? You've been tracking what's happening on the story from Renana.
Hi, Priyanka. Yes, so the protesters have launched this day of disruption. I've been in touch with the organisers. 5:30 this morning, they were setting up tents at the Herzliya interchange. From 7 o'clock, roads were being blocked at Haifa. From 8 o'clock, there was a student march in Tel Aviv. And this morning, military reservists were rallying in Jerusalem. Now, the Jerusalem and Tel Aviv main highways were blocked temporarily. Protesters were giving out snacks to drivers stuck in the traffic. But it seems the police have been able to maintain a balance of allowing people to protest while not disrupting people's lives too much and allowing the traffic to keep flowing. Now, the protests, they're planning more for this afternoon. They're planning a big protest again at the airport, at the Supreme Court, at the Parliament, this evening outside the US consulate and at multiple locations across the country. Remember, this has been 27 weeks now of protests, and the protesters were threatening that this is going to be the largest protest so far. Now, there have certainly been protests. I got here I'm in Rishon LeZion, south of Tel Aviv. I came to see how much of a day of disruption this really was. I have to say that the journey was completely fine, and I could see the roads flowing alongside the train. Traffic definitely quieter than normal. We don't know if that's because people have just been warned off against going on the roads today, or if they're joining in the protests themselves. But one thing is that yesterday, the big chain of malls, remember they announced that they were announcing a blanket shutdown today, and they actually backtracked on that following a backlash from some employees and customers, which is a reminder that while many people are out protesting, there are many people that support judicial reform, and the challenge will be to find a consensus.
Right, absolutely. Finding a consensus is key here, and many people who are critiquing this reform, as it's being called, are saying that it's essentially Netanyahu's quest to control the judiciary. So will these protests actually reap any kind of results in their favor?
So the protests so far did succeed in stopping that initial judicial overhaul plan, with Prime Minister Netanyahu effectively saying that that was dead, and that is being attributed to the protests. Whether or not that happens now remains to be seen, and I think a lot will be judged on how successful the protesters are today in causing disruption across the country. Remember that the talks froze in June, and that was after the government didn't fill their position on the Judicial Selection Committee, and the opposition said that they would reconvene the talks once that committee reconvenes, and tomorrow Parliament is going to be voting on that remaining seat for the committee. President Herzog has now called for a return to the talks. Benny Gantz, who is the first party head to agree now from the opposition to return to those talks. And remember, latest polls show that if there was an election held today, that he would beat Prime Minister Netanyahu. And opposition head Yair Lapid has now agreed also to come back to the talks. And Economy Minister Nir Barkat, who's from the Likud party, he suggested that after the first reading, the coalition could return to the talks. So it remains to be seen. The Justice Committee is preparing for the second and third readings of this bill in Parliament. Right. The government wants to pass the bill by the summer recess at the end of July, and we'll have to wait and see if there is now a return to the talks.
Right, Jody, thanks so much for the latest on that, and we'll come back to you for more as the story continues to unfold.
Thank you.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.